In a world where power speaks loudest and truth is buried beneath money, one woman dared to break the silence. Nia Jordan, a black heiress hiding in plain sight, takes a job in her own luxury restaurant to see what her family's company has become. But when the ruthless CEO humiliates her in front of everyone, calling her nothing and telling her to stay quiet, he doesn't know who he's talking to, because the woman he just insulted owns everything he stands on. This is The Price of Silence, a story about racism, justice, and the courage to reclaim what's yours. If you believe truth always finds its voice, don't forget to subscribe, share this video, and watch the next chapter. Your voice matters too. The night skyline of Manhattan shimmered like a living circuit board, and the tower of low-corp hotels rose among the others, like a blade of steel catching the city's pulse. From the street below, its windows gleamed gold, and at the top floor, the restaurant known as the Crown Room glowed like a crown jewel. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil and money. Waiters moved like clockwork, balancing trays of champagne beneath chandeliers that dripped light like melting glass. Every detail was precision, every smile, every step rehearsed for an audience that measured worth by price tags. Nia Jordan moved silently through that glittering world in the uniform of an invisible class. Her crisp white shirt and black apron fit her perfectly, but she had learned to make herself smaller, to bow her shoulders slightly so her height would not draw attention. The name on her tag read Nia Williams, and the simplicity of that lie protected a truth no one here could imagine. Only 3 weeks ago, she had stepped off a plane from Atlanta with a plan to reclaim the company that bore her family's name. A plan that required her to disappear into the lowest rung of her own empire. The Crown Room had once been her grandfather's pride, the heart of Jordan Estates. He had built it not as a monument to wealth, but as a stage for what he called the art of welcome. He believed that luxury without humanity was just vanity. After his death, those ideals had been stripped away, one by one, under the leadership of the new CEO, Richard Lowell. The board had called him a visionary, a man who could modernize the aging hospitality brand. To Nia, he was something else, a predator who fed on legacy. From her vantage point beside the wine station, Nia watched the room with the quiet intensity of a soldier behind enemy lines. The laughter of the rich floated around her, brittle and rehearsed. A young busser fumbled with a stack of plates, his hands shaking. The manager's glare snapped across the room like a whip, and the boy steadied himself, whispering an apology. It was always like this, fear moving under the surface like an electric current. The warmth that had once filled this place was gone, replaced by obedience and exhaustion. When she clocked in each evening, Nia felt the same mixture of anger and sorrow. She had grown up walking these hallways as a child, hiding beneath linen-draped banquet tables while her grandfather greeted guests with hugs instead of handshakes. She could still remember his laugh, deep and infectious, the way he would say, "Hospitality is love in uniform, baby girl." But since his passing, the company he built had been reshaped into something colder, something designed to impress investors rather than welcome guests. Under Lowell, Jordan Estates had been renamed Low Corp Hotels, as if an entire family history could be erased with a new logo. The kitchen doors swung open, releasing a brief storm of sound-shouting chefs, sizzling pans, the thump of knives. Nia slipped inside for a breath, letting the chaos wash over her. Here, at least, life still existed in its raw form. She caught the eye of Marcus, the sous chef, who gave her a nod of weary solidarity. He knew she was different, though he didn't know how. "Table 12's allergic to shellfish," he muttered, sliding a plate toward her. "Don't let the new guy mess it up." "Got it," she said softly, lifting the tray with effortless precision. Her movements were measured, graceful, the way her grandfather had taught her. She could balance 5 plates on one arm without a tremor. Her professors at Harvard had once marveled at her composure under pressure. None of them knew she had learned it carrying soup through crowded dining rooms at age 12. When she emerged into the dining area again, the mood had shifted. The manager, Cameron, a tall man with anxious eyes, was pacing between tables, adjusting glassware by millimeters. "Focus, people," he hissed at the staff. "He's coming." The room seemed to exhale and hold its breath at once. Everyone knew who he was, Richard Lowell. Even before he arrived, his reputation filled the air like cologne, expensive and suffocating. A self-made billionaire from Connecticut, he was known for his ruthless takeovers, his disdain for what he called sentimental management, and his particular fondness for humiliating anyone beneath him. He had turned Jordan Estates' warm elegance into a sterile brand of corporate luxury. Profits had soared, but at a price that could not be measured on paper. The glass doors opened, and he entered with two men in tailored suits. His smile was sharp, his posture imperial. He didn't glance at the staff. He expected the world to orbit him. The servers straightened instinctively, each terrified of drawing his attention. Nia bowed her head just enough to seem invisible, but her eyes followed him as he crossed the room to his usual table by the window, the one her grandfather used to reserve for community leaders and civil rights advocates. The irony burned. Lowell spoke with the easy arrogance of a man who had never been told no. His voice carried across the restaurant, filling the silence. "Make sure the Bordeaux is decanted properly this time," he told Cameron without looking up. "Last week I might as well have been drinking vinegar." Cameron stammered an apology. Lowell waved a dismissive hand. "Save your breath. Just fix it." Nia's co-worker, a young white waitress named Macy, stood frozen near the corner, her hands trembling around a tray. She had only been working there for 2 months, and the fear in her eyes reminded Nia why she had come. Lowell's policies had turned the staff into ghosts, stripped of confidence and joy. Even the regular customers seemed more subdued, careful not to laugh too loudly or spill a drop of wine. Later, when the rush settled, Nia leaned against the counter near the espresso machine, pretending to check her order slips. Cameron passed by, muttering to himself, eyes darting toward Lowell's table. "He's in one of his moods," he whispered. "God help us if the steak's overdone." Nia said nothing. She had learned that silence was the best disguise. Beneath her calm exterior, her thoughts were sharp and calculating. Every night she worked here, she gathered details, names, dates, supplier invoices, whispered complaints from the kitchen. The truth was already forming a shape in her mind, a shape that could destroy Lowell if revealed at the right time. Still, the weight of what she was doing pressed against her chest. She was living a lie inside the walls her family built. There were moments when she wiped a table or smiled through an insult, when she wondered if her grandfather would understand. But then she remembered the faces of the employees who had been fired for minor infractions, the single mothers who had lost their health care, the janitor who had cried in the locker room after being told his position was outsourced. Those memories steadied her resolve. Hours passed. The restaurant moved like a machine. Lowell's laughter boomed occasionally, loud and hollow. The city beyond the glass shimmered with thousands of lives that didn't know a small war was brewing inside this tower. When her shift finally ended near midnight, Nia stepped out into the cold. The air bit at her cheeks, but the night felt cleaner than the rooms above. She removed her apron and folded it neatly under her arm, an old habit. The streetlights threw long shadows across the pavement, and for a brief moment she felt the ghost of her grandfather walking beside her. She made her way toward the subway, blending into the flow of service workers heading home, the invisible current that kept the city alive while the powerful slept. Around her, laughter and exhaustion mingled in equal measure. She thought about how many of these people had once worked for Jordan Estates, how many still did but under a new name that erased their history. Her phone buzzed. A single text from Savannah, her lawyer and confidant. "You sure about this?" Nia stared at the words before replying. "Absolutely. He thinks I'm no one. That's my advantage." When she got home to her small rented apartment in Harlem, a deliberate choice to stay out of the corporate radar, she hung her uniform on the back of a chair and opened her laptop. Dozens of files lined the desktop, labeled with dates and cryptic titles, employee schedules, supplier contracts, payroll discrepancies. She had spent the past weeks collecting evidence quietly, posing questions that sounded innocent but revealed a pattern of deceit. Each document was a brick in the case she was building. Lowell's empire looked strong on the surface, but she knew the foundation was rotting. Nia leaned back, rubbing her temples. The glow from the screen cast her reflection in the window, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loneliness. She was surrounded by strangers, pretending to be one of them, fighting a battle none of them knew existed. She thought of her mother long gone and her grandfather's final words before the heart attack that took him. Never let them buy your silence, Nia. Our name means something. Don't let them forget it. Outside, sirens wailed faintly. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician played a saxophone that carried through the night like a memory of hope. Nia closed her laptop and whispered to the darkness, I won't. The next morning, the news cycle buzzed about Lowe Corp's rising stock prices and Lowell's upcoming merger announcement. The world saw him as untouchable, but Nia knew better. She tied her apron again, pinned on her fake name tag, and returned to the tower. Another day to watch, another day to wait. Every empire falls the same way, she thought, as the elevator rose toward the crown room. It starts with one person inside who stops believing in the myth. And she had stopped believing a long time ago. The next day unfolded with the same hollow rhythm that had haunted the crown room for months. The sun rose and fell behind the skyscrapers without ever touching the hearts of the people trapped in that restaurant's endless performance. Nia arrived an hour before opening, walking through the gleaming lobby of the Lowe Corp Tower as if stepping into enemy territory. Every surface was polished to a sterile shine. Every employee she passed wore the same expression, alert, anxious, careful not to offend invisible gods. The company had once been built on grace and belonging. Now it thrived on fear. She changed into her uniform in the narrow staff locker room, listening to the hum of the ventilation and the clatter of shoes against tile. Macy was already there, tying her apron with shaking hands. She looked up at Nia with a nervous smile. He's coming again tonight, she whispered. Nia didn't need to ask who. Everyone in the building knew. The CEO had been hosting dinners almost every week, parading investors through the flagship restaurant as if it were his personal throne room. Relax, Nia said softly, though the words felt like an empty spell. Just breathe. Do your job and don't let him get to you. Macy nodded, but her eyes betrayed the exhaustion of someone who had already been broken too many times. Nia wanted to tell her the truth, to promise that this nightmare would end soon, but she couldn't. Not yet. The moment wasn't right, and timing was everything. By dusk, the restaurant was alive again, filled with the shimmer of glass and the murmur of old money. Waiters glided through the aisles like ghosts, rehearsing every gesture as if on stage. Outside, the city roared, but inside there was only the faint echo of music and the quiet tension that came before a storm. Richard Lowell arrived a few minutes after 7. The staff froze in a wave of dread as he entered. He wore a charcoal gray suit, perfectly tailored, his tie a slash of blood-red silk. 2 men followed him, potential investors from Tokyo, both stiff and silent. Lowell's grin was all teeth and arrogance. He clapped one of the men on the back as they approached their table, boasting about profit margins and modern efficiency. To him, the restaurant wasn't a place of hospitality. It was a stage for domination. He made everyone feel small so that he could feel large. From her station near the bar, Nia watched the performance unfold. Every movement he made was calculated. When a server poured his wine, he lifted his glass to the light and frowned theatrically. This is the 2015, he said, his voice carrying through the dining room. I requested the 2009. Can you read a label, or is that too complicated? The young man stammered, his face draining of color. I'm sorry, sir. The sommelier said. Lowell cut him off with a laugh sharp as glass. The sommelier is not the one paying for this bottle. Bring what I ordered. Nia clenched her hands behind her back. It wasn't the first time she had seen him humiliate an employee, but every time felt like a new wound. The investors exchanged polite, uneasy smiles, uncertain whether to laugh or look away. The atmosphere in the room shifted from quiet elegance to a brittle, dangerous tension. The dinner dragged on for hours. Lowell sent back his steak twice, complained about the lighting, and insulted the decor that her grandfather had once chosen with care. Through it all, Nia kept her composure. She moved quietly between tables, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, adjusting napkins, all while watching him destroy with his words the very values her family had built over generations. By the time dessert was served, the staff was exhausted. The room smelled of burnt sugar and stress. Macy was carrying a tray of crystal dessert glasses, her hands trembling under the weight. As she passed behind Nia, someone called her name. She turned just slightly and her shoulder brushed Nia's. The tray tilted. In one awful, slow-motion moment, the glasses crashed to the floor, and a splash of golden wine leapt from the last glass straight onto Richard Lowell's pristine suit. Silence fell. The hum of conversation vanished. Even the music seemed to stop. Macy gasped, already crying, while the investors froze, their expressions unreadable. Lowell stood up slowly, his jaw tightening, his face darkening into a mask of fury. Nia opened her mouth to speak, but he was faster. "You," he hissed, pointing at her as if she were an insect. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" His voice was low, trembling with rage. "This suit costs more than your entire year's wages. What are you got, some charity hire? Do you people even know what service means?" "Mr. Lowell," Nia began evenly, but he cut her off again, louder this time, his anger spilling into every corner of the room. "No, don't you, Mr. Lowell me. You people think you can walk in here, take orders, and still somehow demand respect? You're nothing but hired hands. You serve, and you keep quiet. That's your job. Women like you should learn to keep your heads down instead of pretending you belong here." The words hit like stones. Nia felt them in her stomach, but she refused to let them land anywhere deeper. Around them, guests were staring, uncomfortable but silent. No one dared interfere. Macy sobbed softly behind her. Nia straightened her back. For a heartbeat, she considered staying silent, walking away like the rest. But the years of watching him destroy what her grandfather built rose up inside her like fire. She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Tell me, Mr. Lowell," she said, her voice calm enough to cut through the tension. "How does it feel to serve me?" For a moment he looked confused, as if her words were in another language. Then the realization began to dawn, slow and terrible. "What did you just say?" "I asked," she repeated, "how it feels to work for me." The whisper spread through the room like a spark through dry grass. The staff stopped moving. The investors exchanged startled glances. Lowell's eyes narrowed, the smirk fading from his face. "You think this is funny? Some kind of act?" Nia removed her name tag and placed it gently on the table beside his half-eaten dessert. "My name is Nia Jordan," she said, "granddaughter of Isaac Jordan, founder of this company, owner of 51% of its shares." The words seemed to freeze time. Even the chandeliers seemed to tremble. Lowell's expression twisted from disbelief to outrage. "You expect me to believe that?" he spat. "The Jordans sold controlling interest years ago. I run this company." "Not anymore," she said simply. Cameron, the manager, had gone pale as paper. He stood rooted in place, torn between his loyalty to his paycheck and the awe radiating from the woman before him. Two men in dark suits, who had been sitting quietly near the bar all evening, rose to their feet. They moved through the room with deliberate calm, stopping behind Nia like shadows. Her security detail had been there all along, waiting for her signal. Lowell looked from them to her, finally realizing what was happening. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "You think you can walk in here, pretend to be—" Before he could finish, Nia pulled her phone from her pocket and handed it to Cameron. "Call this number," she instructed. "Put it on speaker." His hand trembled as he obeyed. A woman's voice answered almost immediately, crisp and professional. "Jessica Price, legal counsel for Jordan Estates." "Ms. Price," Cameron stammered. "This is Cameron from the Crown Room. I have Ms. Jordan here." "Good," Jessica's voice said. "Is Mr. Lowell present?" Lowell opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Tell him," Jessica continued, "that the board has been informed of his behavior and an emergency meeting has been called for tomorrow morning at 9. Until then, he is advised to remain silent and refrain from further embarrassing the company. That will be all." The line went dead. Lowell's face drained of color. He looked at Nia with a mixture of fury and fear, his mouth opening and closing without words. She met his gaze steadily, feeling no triumph, only the weight of inevitability. "You've made quite a scene tonight," she said quietly. "Your guests are waiting. Try to salvage what's left of your dignity." And with that, she turned and walked out of the restaurant. Her security fell into step behind her, silent and sure. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like judgment. Outside, the city glowed, indifferent to the chaos unfolding in its tallest tower. The air smelled of rain and exhaust. Nia's hands were trembling now, not from fear but from release. She had broken her cover earlier than planned, but it didn't matter. The truth was out. The mask was gone. She took a slow breath and looked up at the skyscraper that bore Lowell's name. The glass reflected her face, calm, determined, resolute. Tomorrow she would face him again, not as a waitress, but as his employer. The elevator doors opened, and her security chief, David, glanced at her. "Are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" "I've been ready for years," she said, stepping inside. As the elevator rose, the city lights fell away beneath her. The game had changed. The man who had mocked her, who had stolen her family's legacy, was about to learn that the silence he demanded from others had a price, and she intended to make him pay it in full. Rain streaked the windows of the black SUV as it wound its way through the sleepless arteries of Manhattan. The city glistened beneath the storm, each street lamp reflected in rippling puddles like fragments of memory. Nia sat in silence in the back seat, her reflection ghostly against the glass. She had changed out of her uniform. Now she wore a simple black turtleneck and wool coat, her hair pulled back. The adrenaline from the confrontation at the Crown Room still pulsed through her veins, but beneath it was a colder emotion in focus. For the first time in months, she wasn't pretending. She was Nia Jordan again, and tomorrow the world would know it too. Her security chief, David, sat in the front passenger seat beside Michael, who drove with professional calm. They had been with her since her grandfather's funeral, veterans of quiet wars fought in boardrooms and backrooms alike. When the elevator doors had closed behind her that night, she had told them only one thing: call Savannah Price. Savannah was already waiting in the penthouse when Nia arrived, sharp, silver-haired, and fiercely loyal to the Jordan legacy. The penthouse had once belonged to Isaac Jordan himself. It was perched high above Central Park, filled with art collected during his travels, from Ghanaian wood carvings to Harlem Renaissance paintings. For years it had sat untouched, sealed like a mausoleum. Nia had avoided it after his death, unable to face the memories pressed into its walls. But tonight, as she stepped through the heavy doors, the place no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like headquarters. Savannah rose from the dining table, where her laptop glowed amid a sprawl of legal documents. "You made an entrance," she said without preamble. Her tone carried a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "I thought you'd stay undercover longer." "He called me you people," Nia replied, setting down her coat, "and told me to stay quiet." The words were like ash in her mouth. "I decided I'd heard enough." Savannah's eyes softened briefly. "Then I suppose the time for observation is over." Nia nodded, taking a seat opposite her. "We moved tonight." Within minutes, the room became a command center. David locked down the floor. Michael took position near the elevator. Savannah began connecting to secure servers, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Nia retrieved a sleek black tablet from her bag and unlocked it with a thumbprint. The screen illuminated dozens of files, photographs, scanned invoices, recorded conversations. For 3 weeks, she had gathered it all piece by piece, pretending to be invisible while watching the rot spread through her company. "Let's start with the supplier contracts," Savannah said. "You mentioned Global Supply Holdings?" Nia nodded. "That's the one Lowell replaced our local vendors with. He claimed it would cut costs by 30%. But look at this." She slid a document toward her, an internal memo marked confidential. "Follow the trail of shell companies. Global Supply Holdings is owned by another corporation called Cedarbrook Limited, registered in the Cayman Islands." Savannah frowned, scrolling. "And Cedarbrook is managed by Orion Equity Partners." Her eyes widened slightly. "That's Lowell's private fund." "He's been funneling money through fake supply contracts," Nia said. "The cost-cutting was never about efficiency. He's been bleeding the company dry, paying himself from both ends." Savannah leaned back, her expression tightening. "Wire fraud, mail fraud, conflict of interest? This isn't just corporate misconduct, Nia. It's criminal." "That's not all." Nia swiped to another file, a digital recording taken from her phone. It was a conversation between 2 regional managers, whispering in the break room. unaware that the waitress restocking the coffee machine had her recorder running. "He's cutting staff hours and falsifying payroll," one of them had said. "They work 16 hours, but the system logs 10. He calls it productivity optimization." Savannah's jaw clenched. Unbelievable. "And then there's this," Naya added, pulling up a second set of documents. "Employee health benefits slashed, scholarship funds canceled. My grandfather started those programs. Lowell replaced them with merit-based bonuses that nobody ever qualifies for." Savannah glanced at her. "You've built quite the arsenal." "I learned from him," Nia said quietly. "He hides behind numbers. I'll destroy him with them." As midnight deepened, the storm outside raged harder. Thunder rolled across the skyline, echoing like the sound of something inevitable. Nia moved to the window, staring down at the city. The lights of the LoCorp tower burned through the mist, a monument to ego. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., she said softly. "That's when it ends." Savannah closed her laptop. "Then we'll need corroboration. Someone on the inside. Who do you trust?" "Robert Henderson," Nia replied. "The restaurant manager. He's been under Lowell's thumb for months, but he's decent. He'll help." Savannah nodded. "Call him." Nia hesitated only a moment before dialing. The line rang twice before a trembling voice answered. "Ms. Jordan?" "Oh my God, I don't know what to say." "Say that you're all right, Robert," Nia said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." He let out a shaky breath. "Everyone's terrified. Mr. Lowell said we'd all be blacklisted. The staff thinks—" "He doesn't control you anymore," she interrupted. "I need something from you. The security footage from tonight, from the main dining room, the last 2 hours." There was a pause, then a whisper. "Yes, ma'am, I can get it. And you should know the invoices for the new suppliers. They're off. Our chef said the meat labeled Prime isn't even USDA certified. It's coming from overseas. Lowell's procurement team has been forging labels." "That's exactly what I expected," Nia said. "Send everything to Savannah Price's secure server. Tonight." He agreed without hesitation, relief palpable in his voice. When she ended the call, Savannah was already typing. "We'll cross-reference the invoices with shipping data. If there's fraud, we'll find it." They worked through the night. Coffee replaced sleep, and the hours blurred. At 3 a.m., the footage arrived, a crisp, high-definition video of the confrontation at the Crown Room. They watched in silence as Lowell berated her, his voice booming, his words dripping with venom. Nia's own calm reply seemed to hang in the air long after the scene ended. Savannah's face was pale when the video stopped. "That recording," she said, "isn't just evidence. It's symbolism. The CEO of a billion-dollar corporation screaming racist insults at his employer in front of witnesses. Once the board sees this, his contract won't save him." Nia sat back, her heartbeat steady. "Then let's make sure they do." By dawn, they had everything. The contracts, the fraudulent ledgers, the testimonies. Savannah's assistant, Eli Clark, arrived carrying a thick portfolio of printed documents and a flash drive containing the digital backups. He was a quiet man with the calm precision of a surgeon. "Everything's ready," he said. "We'll have the boardroom prepped by 8:30. "Good," Nia replied. "We'll need one more piece." She turned to David. "Get in touch with Harrison Gable." "The forensic auditor?" Savannah asked, surprised. "He's with Deloitte." Nia nodded. "He's been reviewing our financials under the radar for weeks. He doesn't know I'm the one who hired him. I want him there tomorrow." "You planned this far ahead?" Savannah asked, studying her. Nia smiled faintly. "I told you, I've been ready for this for years." As the sun began to rise, faint light spilled across the penthouse. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and quiet. Nia stood by the window once more, looking down at the wet streets. Somewhere far below, people were already rushing to work, baristas opening cafes, janitors mopping lobbies, clerks unlocking storefronts. The people her grandfather had always called the real owners of the company. She thought of them now, of the faces she'd seen in the kitchen, the hands that carried the weight of luxury so others could pretend it was effortless. They deserved better than to be ruled by a man like Lowell. Savannah joined her at the window. "You know, once this starts, there's no turning back," she said softly. "The press will swarm. The board will panic. You'll have to lead them." Nia didn't look away from the skyline. "That's the point. It's time they remembered whose name built this company. At 6:30, she finally allowed herself a brief rest. She curled up on the couch, exhaustion sinking into her bones, but her mind refused to quiet. She thought of her grandfather again, of the way he used to sit at the kitchen table, teaching her how to balance a checkbook on one page and how to treat people on the next. Integrity, he'd said, isn't what you do when the world is watching, it's what you do when it's not. Now the world would be watching. When she opened her eyes again, the clock read 8:30. Savannah was already dressed in a tailored navy suit, files organized into a neat stack. David and Michael waited by the door. "The car's ready," Savannah said. Nia stood, smoothing her blazer. She felt calm, almost eerily so. Every trace of the waitress was gone. The woman in the mirror was someone new, or perhaps someone rediscovered. "Let's go," she said. As they drove toward the LoCorp Tower, the morning news was already buzzing with speculation. Rumors of an incident at the Crown Room had spread overnight, though no one yet knew the truth. Reporters stood clustered outside the building, cameras flashing as Nia stepped out of the car. The rain had left the air sharp and cool. She didn't flinch at the barrage of questions. She walked through the lobby with the unhurried grace of someone who belonged there. The receptionist, who had seen her countless times as an anonymous server, now stared in open awe. By the time she reached the executive floor, the boardroom lights were on. Through the glass, she could see the long table, the anxious faces of board members arriving one by one. They didn't yet know what awaited them. Neither did Lowell. He still believed he could talk his way out of anything. But Nia knew something he didn't. Power built on lies always collapses when truth walks in. She paused outside the doors, inhaling deeply. Behind her, Savannah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Ready?" Nia smiled faintly. "He told me to be quiet," she said. "Tomorrow, I'll show him what silence can do." And with that, she stepped inside to face the storm she had summoned. The glass walls of the executive boardroom gleamed like a cathedral built for power. Morning light poured through them, striking the long mahogany table that stretched the length of the room. 12 high-backed chairs surrounded it, and at the head sat Richard Lowell, his expression carved from ice. He adjusted his cufflinks, glanced at his reflection in the window, and smiled faintly to himself. The headlines had not yet reached him. The world, as far as he believed, was still under his control. But when Nia Jordan entered the room, silence fell like a curtain. She didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate, measured, confident. The board members, gray-haired men and women who had built careers avoiding confrontation, stirred uneasily in their seats. Some had seen the video from the night before. Others had only heard whispers. All of them could feel that the hierarchy in which they lived comfortably for years had just shifted. "Good morning," Nia said, her voice even. She wore a dark suit, simple but commanding, her hair neatly tied back, her face calm. There was no trace of the young woman who had cleared tables in their restaurant a day earlier. She walked to the head of the table. Not to the seat beside Lowell where the observers usually sat, but directly opposite him. It was a symbolic move, but symbols mattered. Lowell's lips curved into a condescending smile. "Ms. Jordan," he said, his tone heavy with mock courtesy, "I trust you've had time to reconsider last night's little outburst." Nia met his eyes. "I've had time," she replied, "and I think it's you who should reconsider a few things." He chuckled. "You're not on the board. You hold inherited shares, nothing more. Let's not confuse family nostalgia with corporate authority." "That nostalgia," she said softly, "built everything you see in this room." The words landed like stones dropped into water. The ripples spread through the table. Savannah Price, sitting near the end, opened her folder and slid a thick document across the polished surface toward the chairperson of the board. "Ms. Jordan is here as the majority shareholder," Savannah said firmly. 51%. "As per company bylaws, she has the right to call this emergency session and to present evidence concerning executive misconduct." A murmur ran through the room. Lowell's face lost a shade of color, but he recovered quickly, leaning back in his chair with an exaggerated sigh. "Evidence? Of what?" "I've increased profits by 40%. I've expanded our market share into 3 continents. If you call that misconduct, perhaps Harvard should revoke your MBA. Profit doesn't excuse corruption, Nia said. She tapped a button on the tablet before her, and the screen at the end of the room came to life. A document appeared, one of the invoices she had gathered the night before. Let's begin with Global Supply Holdings. The board members leaned forward as she spoke, her voice calm and precise, the tone of someone who had done this 100 times before. 3 years ago, Mr. Lowell replaced every domestic supplier with this entity. He claimed it would reduce operational costs. In reality, Global Supply Holdings is owned by Cedarbrook Limited, registered offshore, and controlled through Orion Equity Partners, a fund under Mr. Lowell's direct management. The room stirred. One of the directors, a tall man with silver hair, frowned. Are you implying he's been diverting funds? I'm not implying anything, Nia said, switching to the next slide. I'm stating it. Numbers filled the screen: payment transfers, corporate structures, wire histories. Over $70 million have been funneled from company accounts into entities Mr. Lowell controls. In addition, employee payrolls have been altered, hours erased from records, benefits withheld, and product sourcing falsified to appear domestic when it's not. Lowell laughed, but it was the laugh of a man cornered. You've got imagination, I'll give you that. Do you really think a few doctored files? Savannah cut him off. The files are authenticated, time-stamped, and verified by Deloitte's lead auditor, Harrison Gable. She gestured toward the back of the room where Gable stood. He reviewed your books for the last 6 months. His conclusion was unequivocal: sustained financial misconduct, misrepresentation of earnings, and violations of federal trade regulations. Gable stepped forward, handing printed reports to the directors. His tone was professional, detached, deadly. Every transfer, every account number has been traced. This is not a matter of error or oversight. It's systemic. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lowell's fingers twitched on the armrest, but he forced another smile. You're making a mistake. The board won't destroy the man who made them rich. Nia's gaze didn't waver. I think they'll destroy the man who made them complicit. Her next move was planned to perfection. She tapped the tablet again, and the screen changed. The video played. It began quietly, the clatter of a dropped tray, the gasp of a young woman. And then Lowell's voice filled the room, sharp and cruel, echoing through the speakers. You people should learn to stay quiet. Women like you should know your place. The room froze. No one moved. The recording captured everything: the venom, the smug laughter of his guests, the calm defiance in Nia's voice when she finally answered him. How does it feel to serve me? When the screen went black, there was no applause, no outrage, only a heavy, shameful silence. Every person in that room had heard similar words before, though not always so plainly. Now they were forced to confront what kind of man had been leading them. Lowell's composure cracked. That was taken out of context, he snapped. You were impersonating staff. Entrapment. I'll sue. Savannah stood. Entrapment applies to law enforcement, Mr. Lowell. This is corporate governance, and the only thing you've trapped is yourself. The chairperson, a dignified woman named Marianne Holt, finally spoke. Mr. Lowell, until this matter is resolved, the board is suspending your authority, effective immediately. A vote will determine your removal. He slammed his hand on the table. You can't do this. I built this company into what it is. No, Nia said, rising to her feet. My grandfather built it. You just hollowed it out. The vote took less than 5 minutes. 11 in favor, 1 abstention. Unanimous enough. Richard Lowell was removed from his position as CEO. He stood shaking with disbelief. You think this is over? You'll regret this. You're just another angry little girl who... Careful, Nia said quietly. The softness in her tone stopped him cold. That line cost you your career last night. Keep talking, and it might cost you your freedom. As if on cue, 2 federal investigators entered the room, badges gleaming. Mr. Richard Lowell, one said, you're under investigation for corporate fraud and embezzlement. We'll need you to come with us. He turned on Nia, fury blazing in his eyes. You did this. I just told the truth, she replied. They led him out past the silent board, past the windows that looked out over the city he thought he owned. When the door closed behind him, a long collective exhale filled the room. For the first time in years, the air felt clean. Nia remained standing, her hands resting lightly on the table. The directors looked to her now, not as an interloper, not as a child, but as the rightful heir to a legacy they had almost allowed to die. "I don't want revenge," she said, her voice low but steady. "I want restoration. This company was founded on integrity and community. My grandfather believed hospitality was an act of humanity, not greed. We've lost that. I intend to bring it back." One of the older board members nodded slowly. "And how do you plan to do that, Ms. Jordan?" "By remembering who we serve," she said. "Not shareholders, not headlines. People." She outlined her plan: a return to local partnerships, reinstating scholarship programs, reopening community initiatives that had been shut down under Lowell's regime. She proposed to rename the company Jordan Heritage, restoring the family name as a promise, not an ornament. By the time she finished, there was no resistance left. Marianne Holt smiled faintly. "Then welcome home, Ms. Jordan. We'll follow your lead." Nia sat down, exhaustion washing over her like a wave. For the first time since her grandfather's death, she felt him near: his laughter, his strength, the warmth that had built an empire without cruelty. She looked toward the city beyond the glass, where sunlight now broke through the clouds, glinting off the windows of the crown room far below. Lowell would spend the night in a holding cell, the headlines already rewriting his story from visionary to villain. But for Nia, it wasn't about his downfall. It was about what came next. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding never was. But at least now, the foundation was hers again. As the meeting adjourned and the directors filed out, Savannah lingered beside her. "You did it," she said softly. Nia shook her head. "Not yet. I only opened the door." Savannah smiled. "Then let's see what walks through." When the room finally emptied, Nia remained alone. She placed her palm on the cool wood of the table, feeling the history in its grain. "Empires don't fall because of time," she whispered to herself. "They fall when they forget who built them." Outside, the city roared on, unaware that a different kind of revolution had just begun. And somewhere in that sound, in the honking taxis, the voices on the sidewalks, the hum of the waking streets, she could almost hear her grandfather's approval. The morning after the boardroom meeting, the city awoke to headlines that shimmered across every screen in Manhattan. Low Corp CEO resigns amid scandal. Whistleblower, heir takes control of family empire. The return of the Jordan legacy. It was the kind of story that made strangers pause in subway stations and baristas turn up the volume on the television above the counter. Yet for Nia Jordan, sitting at her grandfather's old desk in the restored executive office, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility pressing on her shoulders, both heavy and sacred. The room was exactly as her grandfather had left it. Wide windows overlooking Central Park, a faded photograph of him shaking hands with workers at the First Jordan Estates Hotel, and a collection of jazz records lined neatly on a shelf. During Lowell's tenure, this office had been stripped of its warmth, turned into a sterile showroom of chrome and glass. Nia had spent the early hours dismantling that facade. The polished metal nameplate bearing Richard Lowell, Chief Executive Officer, now lay in the trash, replaced by one that read simply Nia Jordan, President and Chairwoman. Behind it, the old mahogany surface had been uncovered from beneath years of synthetic lacquer. It felt human again. Savannah entered quietly, a stack of reports in hand. "The press conference is set for noon," she said. "Every major outlet's confirmed. CNN, The Times, even Forbes. You'll have the whole country watching." Nia closed the folder in front of her, where Lowell's final financial reports were laid out like the autopsy of a corrupt body. "Good," she said. "It's time they saw what Jordan Heritage really means." Savannah hesitated, studying her. "You're sure about that name?" Nia smiled faintly. "It's not about nostalgia. It's about truth. Low Corp was built on fear. Jordan Heritage will be built on people." Outside, the clouds were clearing, sunlight slicing through the gray. The transformation of the tower had already begun. The cold corporate banners bearing Lowell's initials were being replaced with new ones, deep gold and navy, echoing the colors her grandfather had once chosen. Downstairs, workers had gathered in the lobby, whispering as the maintenance crew dismantled the large metal letters that spelled LOWECORP across the marble. Each clang echoed like a bell tolling the end of an era. By 11 o'clock, the top floors buzzed with quiet energy. Reporters filled the atrium, technicians adjusting lights and microphones. Employees watched from the mezzanine above, some curious, others hopeful, a few still cautious. They had survived years of silent endurance, and many could not yet believe that change was real. Nia understood that. Trust wasn't built overnight, it was earned in the long days that followed. When she stepped onto the stage, the murmur in the room dimmed to nothing. Cameras turned like sunflowers tracking light. She took her place at the podium, dressed not in a designer suit, but in a simple cream blouse and dark trousers, elegant, but human. Behind her, a new banner unfurled, revealing the words, Jordan Heritage, Building Tomorrow with Humanity. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear, unhurried. "Yesterday, the board of directors accepted the resignation of Richard Lowell as chief executive officer. The investigation into his actions is ongoing, and justice will take its course. But I didn't come here to speak about him. I came to speak about us, about what we lost, and what we're going to rebuild together." The microphones captured every syllable, but what held the room wasn't the technology. It was her tone, measured, empathetic, resolute. She wasn't performing, she was remembering. "When my grandfather Isaac Jordan founded this company, he believed that hospitality was more than service. He believed it was the recognition of human dignity, the act of saying, 'I see you, in you matter.' Somewhere along the way, we forgot that. We chased numbers, not people. We turned kindness into a slogan instead of a practice. That ends today." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Some of the older employees nodded, eyes shining. The younger ones, many of whom had never known the company before. Lowell leaned forward, drawn by the unfamiliar sound of sincerity in corporate speech. "Starting this week," Nia continued, "Jordan Heritage will relaunch every community program that was closed under the previous administration. The Scholarship Fund for Hospitality Students will return, renamed the Isaac Jordan Fellowship. Our supplier network will once again prioritize small local businesses, and we will create something new, the Foundation Initiative, a partnership between our hotels and community organizations to provide training, housing, and career opportunities for those who need them most." Cameras flashed. Murmurs rippled through the audience. For the first time in years, there was applause, tentative at first, then rising like a tide. Nia let it wash over her, not as praise but as a promise. After the press conference, she spent hours walking through the building through departments that had once been off limits to anyone below executive rank. She shook hands with receptionists, spoke to janitors, asked line cooks what they needed most. She listened more than she spoke. Every floor told a story of resilience, of quiet suffering, of people who had kept the company alive even when its leadership had forgotten them. In the restaurant that had been the stage for her confrontation with Lowell, she found Macy polishing glasses. The young woman froze when she saw her, the same fear flickering in her eyes as that night. But Nia smiled gently. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "You were brave to show up the next day." Macy blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "I thought they'd fire me." "They should have fired the man who made you afraid to drop a glass," Nia replied softly. "You're part of this place, don't forget that." She left her standing there, tears glinting, the kind that carry relief more than sorrow. By late afternoon, the city outside was bathed in gold. From her office window, Nia watched as workers finished removing the last of the old signage from the tower's facade. In its place, the new emblem was hoisted, a stylized crest of intertwined hands beneath a rising sun. The same design her grandfather had once sketched on a napkin when he was dreaming of his first hotel. It wasn't just a logo, it was a restoration. Savannah entered quietly, carrying the evening news report. "He's been indicted," she said. "Wire fraud, embezzlement, falsifying corporate statements. They expect a full trial." Nia didn't look surprised. "He'll have his day in court," she said. "That's all that matters." Savannah set the papers down, hesitating. "You could have destroyed him completely. The footage alone could have ruined him beyond repair. But you didn't. Because this was never about him," Nia said. "It was about us. I don't want to lead through vengeance. I want to lead through restoration. Savannah nodded slowly. Then you've already succeeded. That evening, the staff gathered in the lobby, as if by instinct. No one told them to come. They just did. The chandeliers glowed softly above, their light no longer sterile but warm. Nia stood among them, not apart from them, her heels clicking against the marble that had once echoed with fear. She looked around at the faces, diverse, weary, hopeful, and felt the pulse of something ancient and new. Tomorrow, she said quietly to the crowd, we begin again. The applause this time wasn't polite or forced. It was real, like a heartbeat. Someone began to clap rhythmically, and soon the sound filled the lobby, rising into the air like thunder turned joyful. For the first time in years, laughter returned to that building, not the cruel, performative laughter of the powerful, but the laughter of people rediscovering their worth. When the last light was dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Nia remained alone in the quiet. She walked to the center of the lobby and looked up. The old brass letters from the company's earliest days had been found in storage and restored. They now hung above the entrance, gleaming in the lamplight. Jordan Heritage. Beneath them, a new inscription had been added to the marble wall. Founded on dignity, restored in faith. Outside, the city never slept, but in that moment, the world seemed still. She could almost feel her grandfather's presence beside her, the scent of his aftershave, the echo of his voice. You remembered, baby girl, she imagined him saying. You remembered what we stood for. She closed her eyes, smiling. I did, Grandpa, and I'm not done yet. From the street, passers-by looked up to see the golden lights of the tower shining against the night, the new name glimmering above the skyline. For most, it was just another story about another corporation reborn. But for those who worked within its walls, it was more than that. It was proof that justice, when born from courage, could also bring grace. As Nia left the building and stepped into the cool evening, the city's sounds surrounded her. The hum of traffic, the chatter of strangers, the faint melody of a street saxophonist somewhere down the block. She walked toward the sound, her steps steady, her heart light. Tomorrow would bring challenges, criticism, and the long work of rebuilding. But tonight, for the first time in years, she could breathe. The empire her grandfather had built was alive again, not because of wealth or ambition, but because a woman who had been told to be silent had chosen instead to speak and to listen. In the end, silence had indeed carried a price. But for Nia Jordan, that price had bought something greater than revenge. It had bought redemption. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters. Check out the other videos on the channel for more powerful stories like this one. And if it moved you, share it with your friends. Your support means everything.